So jumping into our teaching class, looking back at these resources, looking specifically at the book Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. And I encourage you to pause the video, take a quiz, try to recall the three practices that we covered last time. What are they called? And write out the best you can a description. Try to do this without reviewing it. And if you can get the fourth practice, which is, if I remember right, a -1, we'll call that a bonus. But okay, who wants to share what you got? James V.
The three, there may have been 4 or 5, but the first three were the retrieval practice or the tact of recalling information in increments.
Okay, let's go. Let's just start with retrieval practice. Is that what you're describing right now?
Yeah,
Okay, say it again.
the tact of recalling in spaced
Right.
amounts
That's what.
through various various recall methods like review, homework, quiz the next day. That would be one way of retrieval practice. The second one is spacing or space practice, which would be the tact of spaced sessions. And the third is interweaving, which would be the method of multiple subjects, like in a day study, that is called mixing. We had that in operation early in class, where we had data center work and then like Bible review.
Okay.
Survey.
So yeah, those were the three. We might want to drill a little bit more precisely on the retrieval practice description. Anybody else want to share your description of retrieval practice?
Well, what I remember is that the retrieval practice is most beneficial, that once you start and let's say you've got the lesson learned today, then maybe a retrieval today, and then maybe next week, and then maybe 2 weeks later, and then maybe 3 weeks later, with the intent to try to remember that content as you go. For the point is, the spacing it out further is what I got from that.
Okay, so we did try to do that with our retrieval practice, but I just want to clarify that that's actually the other concept, the spaced practice.
Right, right. So that's where I blended two of them.
Yeah, and that was kind of
I blended two.
with yours, V. I think it was kind of blended too.
Yeah.
The essence of the retrieval practice isn't it being spaced out. That's combining the two forms together. So we want to get a James W. What'd you get for retrieval practice? Anything?
Write it down. Color recovery practice. I'm trying to think of how to describe that.
Yeah.
Just what you did, trying to recall what you did learn, like the next day, trying to recall it and, repeatedly trying to see how much of it you can remember without having to review. And then, then I had the interleaving, sorry, it's just overlapping different subjects.
Right.
Kind of like the pages of a book. So you're just doing, spending like an hour on each thing, and then, so that way you're learning a bit of each one, and then
Right.
then you have to review it.
Yeah. So okay.
I think James's description of overlapping is better than mine of mixing.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm actually he got the term correct too. It is the actual term is interleaving. Interweaving makes more sense, but they actually call it interleaving for whatever that reason is. But
interleaving, I'm just picturing like you got two books laying next to each other,
mm-hmm.
and you're just laying over each page.
Yeah. So the retrieval practice. Here's what I said. Challenging students to recall info for themselves as opposed to them passively reviewing it through rereading, listening to a summary, etc.
That's what I put, no, active
Um,
review is better than passive review.
So yeah, the retrieval practice is more specifically related to that active review. It's not so much about the timing. Let's read their summary. Recalling facts or concepts or events from memory. So that's their description. It's you trying to recall it as opposed to just
Rereading.
yeah, going back over the information without you having to pull it from your memory. So is that clarified a little bit?
I overlap to combine the two for sure.
Did anybody get and yeah, James W. is right. There was two negative practices mentioned. I got one of the two.
Put down cramming.
Cramming is a more popular term, which I think refers to the same thing.
Jamming as much info as possible in one long study period. Cramming like an all-nighter type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, so the term they used, which I would relate to that one, I guess, is massed practice.
Right.
I put practicing the same thing over long periods of time. They put this, did they even give us a
Okay,
description?
and what's about mass long periods of time?
That would be massed practice.
Okay, and how did you plug it into that?
So like,
Because I use a different kind of.
instead of breaking up my practice over multiple sessions, I just do it all at once, right? So let's say, the example of instead of studying for a half an hour a day, I just do one long 2-hour session,
Okay,
right? So it's massed practice. I'm cramming it all into one, usually last minute, to kind of the idea of cramming.
Yeah.
Massed practice doesn't necessarily imply cramming in that last minute sense, but nevertheless, you're just cramming all of your study into one period as opposed to breaking it up. So if I review and then I try to recall, that's not going to be as helpful as if I try to recall after a day or 2 days or a week. That's forcing me, it's making it more challenging.
and that's
to
where I
recall
came up with the
information.
concept of extended out, because the example you just used.
Oh,
I might have picked that up in the definition when we studied earlier, and that's where I got that probably. Then you extend it out, and then maybe,
So
if
yeah,
we were recovered, we'd go over this again let's say in 2 weeks. And then, the further out you get, the recall.
The harder it
That's
is.
what I picked from it. Drew.
well, yeah, and that was technically combining multiple
Exactly.
of these techniques in the same one, which is kind of what you want to do, but we want to, for the purpose of learning the practices individually, we want to be able to make sure we understand how they're different and
And then I like what it said at the end of the fifth claim, the trick seems to be finding the sweet spot in between those spaced practices.
Mhm. You don't want the space to be too long to where you've forgotten,
Or too short.
or too
you're
short
not
where it's too
stretching.
easy. Yeah.
Okay, again, interleaving versus the word interweaving. In other words, leaving, interleaving like this.
I
Like
Yes,
you're
I guess
one
so.
page over another.
That's what
Yeah.
James was describing. That could be. I don't really
Is that
don't know.
what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that makes sense to me, with leaving, interviewing is where you're taking like a page and
Yeah,
a page,
yeah.
a page, like you got two books
There we
sitting next
go.
to each other and you
Yeah.
keep flipping them.
I get it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the term is, so it makes
That's how it's stuck in my head.
yeah,
Right.
'Cause
Like
it's
the
talking
leaves of a
about-
book.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
and that's what I wrote, like to leave the book.
Well, when you have different editions, or a second edition is considered like a second leaf.
Yeah,
So we have one concept interwoven into another concept, you've got a lot of concepts within concepts.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because we were talking about, you know.
Right?
Doing multiple topics.
Yep, multiple topics.
So you're
Multiple
interweaving.
subjects are mixed with each other, and so that's why I was picturing
Yeah,
like
there we
two
go,
books.
there we go.
So you flip over this page of this book, and then flip the page of this book, and then flip the page of
Yep.
this book. That's how I.
Sounds good.
And then all those, if you want to give me sense of the evening, with each book page.
All right, any other thoughts on what we've talked about previously?
Okay, I've got a line set at 6 claim.
Yeah, and let's actually review the claims too. That would probably be helpful just to summarize. First claim, that first paragraph, learning is deeper and more durable when it's effortful.
The key word here in the sentence, durable.
Okay, where's that now?
First
Very first sentence.
Sentence.
Okay,
Durable.
learning is deeper and more durable when it's effortful. Next claim, we are poor judges of, this is the second paragraph.
mhm,
We are poor judges of when we are learning well and when we're not. Third principle, rereading text and mass practice of a skill or a new knowledge are by far the preferred strategies of learners of all stripes, but they're also among the least productive.
That was.
It's kind of a wordy way to-
what's that now?
In high school, I like cramming.
Yep.
I did. I mean, I would study for most of a quarter. And in the last week, I spent cramming. And the quarters that I was really engaged in the classroom and actually did my homework, as opposed to quarters that I wasn't.
Mhm.
I always got a better grade when I,
Mhm.
when I was consistent.
And I don't know about you guys, but I mean, my cramming sessions were sometimes productive, but it almost seems like they were kind of an ideal first session, but not ideal as an only study session. In other words, I would go and I would basically just memorize as much as I could, you know. So let's say I'm cramming this information, I'd say retrieval practice. Okay, I'd read it, challenging students to recall info for themselves. Okay, retrieval practice, challenging students to recall info for themselves. I'd just memorize it. I'd go through, you know, each point and try to just memorize as much as I could. And it was, you know, somewhat productive in the short term. And that's probably a good way to start, is just really drilling it in.
Don't get me
But the problem is that if you don't follow up with that, maybe after a day or then after 2 days, you know, then you drilled it in, you were off to a good start, but then it's only a short-term benefit, you know, it's not going to stick over.
Like the seed that goes on the shallow ground.
So, yeah. So especially, I mean, you know, some things, maybe you don't need to learn them, you know, that deeply, but if we're talking about teaching as a form of ministry, where hopefully what we're saying is worth them remembering for the rest of their lives, then, you know, the struggle that I've wrestled with this over the years is, okay, how can my teaching methods be used in such a way where we are teaching for long-term effect? And that, you know, I think we've talked about this, but it takes a certain level of commitment by your students, because most people want something new every time, right? We don't want to drill down the same thing that we talked about the last 10 times. We want a new session. Let's talk about something new, right? But that might be more fun. That might be more interesting. But if I don't remember the last thing, then why go on to something else? So we've even probably, you know, fallen short in our classes of really engaging this to the fullest extent. I mean, we review it the next time, but is that sufficient? If I handed you a quiz from a class last year, would you still be able to ace it?
Probably not.
And yet, if I'm doing my studies well and I'm diligently, I've learned very early that those 8 essential lessons that you're building on, you can't get to level 2 unless you got number 2, 1. Can't do 3 unless you get 1 and 2. So theoretically, I would like to think that I'd be able to answer some of these things pretty well. But these questions are gonna be deeper. They're not gonna be one sentence or 1, 2 or 3 word sentences. It's gonna be more lengthy description because you've gone through all these other levels of awareness. So yes and no. Am I gonna remember it exactly as I was taught? No, because I've been and added all these other extra things.
Yeah.
So in itself would be good. But there are things that I guarantee you that I learned in this class that I take forward all day, every day, and they just come out. The expressions, like one of the things that just blew me up was this relationship with Jesus is experiential. Now, where that was where it was in there, I don't know, but it's a part of me, and I can branch off of that knowing. It's not just one answer. It's experiential, which was in there, but I can give you more of a broader definition of experiential.
Yeah.
And it was used in multiple facets.
Yeah.
To create a well-rounded definition, experientially.
Yeah, so it just becomes a part of your vocabulary.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how it just comes out, and it's just a part of your vocabulary. That's when I feel like it really hit home with me, these things that I've learned that, oh my goodness, I just learned that in school 4 years ago. Where's Jared to hear this? My instructor, why isn't he here to hear this?
I'm myself sometimes going.
Yeah, and then you recall, oh yeah, I remember that.
I know that it was from, but.
Yeah.
And then I'll get, with my brain, I'll get stuck on trying to remember what class.
What lesson? You
And what we were
can't
talking
nail
about. Shut up, James, just keep
it.
rolling.
You can't nail where you learned it, but you can
Right.
expound on it.
Because like I said, a lot of the things we did learn were kind of interconnected with other things, like this experiential knowing of Christ. The deeper we got into it, the more facets this
Yeah.
Experience looks like.
experiential relationships look like, and it was like
So
expounded. And
exactly, so I know what the word experiential, I can experience it, but now this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like an internal experience.
Was this your final paper in seminary? These 8 essential lessons?
No.
Isn't this like what the curriculum that your original 8 essential lessons?
Thank you.
Like a homework thing that you had to come up with a curriculum on a course.
No, actually, I was considering to use that for that final paper, but instead I did kind of a modified version of the apprenticeship. I was trying to come up with a program for new Christians, similar to the apprenticeship, but more related to someone who's just starting out. So yeah, that was actually my final paper, and it'd be cool for us to go back and review that and pray into what that might look like to implement that as Telos moves forward. But yeah, that was the final paper that I did. And then the class, the like single class that I did as a project for another class, it wasn't my final project, but was the ministry calling and gifts class. And that was actually the worksheet that I'm hoping that we'll use here in a couple weeks, maybe, to go through and create a curriculum for a class, or a lesson plan, basically. So yeah, the discipleship class has just been a snowball over 8 years. Things being added,
You kept rolling,
and there's
no momentum as it went downhill.
yeah, and they were like, some of those were in big chunks, but
Yeah, cause like Randy, every time you set up, you've gotta start off with and repeat it like 3 or 4, 7 times. That, yeah, you know, Jared originally started this, you're sitting right in that very chair you're sitting in now.
that's
It's
technically,
just like I've been through a few metamorphoses.
Yeah.
Are you working with Ben?
Modifications.
Great, that's cool stuff, man.
Yeah.
The 8 lessons?
No, Ben is
Cool stuff.
taking a pause with that.
okay, so fourth claim, I think is where we're at. Retrieval practice, recalling facts or concepts or events from memory is a more effective learning strategy than review by rereading. I've covered that. Fifth claim relates to the principle of space practice. I couldn't find like a quote where he like just kind of hammered it down, but I summarized the claim to suggest that practice is more effective when there are intervals of time in between sessions.
Okay, see, that's where I got it messed up. I said extend it out, but you didn't specify.
Or when practice of multiple subjects are mixed in with each other, which is also known as interleaving. Sixth claim, I found this, so this is where we're picking up where we left off, correct? Sixth claim, which I found meaningful, states, trying to solve a problem before being taught the solution leads to better learning. My take is that this benefits learners not only by adding another element of challenge into their process, but it can also increase their felt need to pay special attention to the solution.
Have a yellow highlighter.
I don't.
I do.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, okay.
Um,
Trying to solve a problem before being taught the solution. Well, that would only make sense because then it's what you as an educator or as a teacher, you might be able to find as to where the starting reference point as to understanding these things, you know how and where to take them from there. That if they're able to troubleshoot with what they already have learned, you know where they are and where you need to take them.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Sure.
Not only are they learning in the process on how to retrieve these things, but you're able to get the so to speak, temperature of where they're at.
Right.
Where-
And maybe even more
Right.
importantly, they get a little bit of a temperature of where they're at, right?
Oh.
So like if they find this challenging, then, the more challenging they find it to be, the more it exposes their need for learning in that area, right?
And plus also on the other side of the coin, if they're finding success and they're on it, they can be encouraged.
Yeah, I would say that's not as helpful to set them
I
up for
agree.
learning, you know
I
what I
agree.
mean?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more beneficial if they're, doing well after they, had that lesson. I think the concern is that if they do too well on the pre-test, then that can be like, oh, well,
I got
I
this.
already got it figured out, yeah. So, and that could happen, and that could be a sort of a backfire in that kind of,
Well, what I just
practice.
heard there is don't enter myself into this equation. I would find myself being encouraged if I found myself doing it well the first time. I
sure,
would find it really good. Hey, encouragement, I'm doing that, but that I'm feeding myself into that equation.
yeah, and I guess, it's possible to be encouraged without being proud. So, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but
Right.
that's just the danger is.
Again, by knowing the individual across.
Any other thoughts on that sixth claim? So what might be creative ways to use this practice or this strategy? What would this look like in practice?
It would depend on the topic.
Jesus.
Okay, what's the question?
Well, so I guess we could come up with a concrete example. What was the last discipleship session that you did
Okay, what?
with one of your guys? What was the last?
Okay, we're
Topic.
still doing, is, Enter the Kingdom.
Okay, do you remember which session it was?
Okay, one is on the second and race is starting this afternoon.
Okay, he's just starting this
Yeah,
last week. Okay,
last week, the building was closed. We were gonna start last week.
okay.
It was,
So yeah, technically the topic was Jesus. That second session, that's the session basically that says as part of the investigation of the gospel message, who is Jesus? And the content kind of goes into those 6 points of, non-negotiable, aspects of who Jesus is. So what might it look like to use this strategy in that content with that content?
Those 6 ways that you can be aware of Christ in your life looks like this, or this. Can you give me an example of this? Can you give me an example of that? We just discussed here, these are the ways that we can see Jesus and experience him. Can you give me an example?
Okay, so remember what we're talking about right now.
Applying personal experience into what he's learned.
Okay,
Overlapping difference?
so that's actually not what we're talking about right now. This 6th claim is getting the students to try to solve a problem before they're taught the solution. So this is happening before you give them the information. Does that make sense? James V, you had something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for
Are we all-
transparency. I love it.
Are we on the same page now, though? We
Yeah,
understand what
yeah,
we're talking about? The
Then
6th
after
claim?
this year, I said no.
Okay.
All right, help me.
I mean, I'm just brainstorming with you guys. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. Okay, if the gospel, maybe I would preface it, if the gospel is about who, Jesus, who he is, his life on earth, that's an important part of the gospel message. What would you say are non-negotiable characteristics of who Jesus is, or what we absolutely need to affirm in what characterized his life on earth?
Well, there's many common truths that you have to take forward before you look at that. One of which, 100% man, 100% God.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get them to look at. So I look at the content and I say, okay, here's the answer. It's basically like Jeopardy, right? Here's the answer. So what is the question that this is the answer to? I guess that's the opposite of Jeopardy, but you see what I'm saying. If the content is about who Jesus is, then I want to try to bring a question to get them to brainstorm and say, okay, well, what do I think is necessary to understand about who Jesus is? And yeah, hopefully they would come up with at least some of those, right? But if they're like a new Christian, which is, or maybe a non-Christian, then they might not come up with that. They might say, well, I don't know, I guess, wasn't he like just a really nice guy, a teacher, or, he was that religious guy, right? I don't know what they would say, but,
No.
it's like, well, okay, now let's talk about what scripture affirms is, some non-negotiables of who we need to understand Jesus to be. So other brainstorming, what what creative ways could we implement this claim? Or have we done it?
Present the problem first. We need to present the problem first. And then,
I don't think, I don't know the answer, so I'll find it.
Yeah, so I mean, it basically is, go ahead.
present the problem first. And ask them what would be the desired result of solving the problem.
Mhm.
Sam, I'm having a hard time. I need specifics.
Okay, let's do some more specifics. So one, I just taught about faith a couple times in the last week or two. So that's kind of a classic word study problem. Hey, in my experience, a lot of us have some like really important misunderstandings, or how do I say that? Have misunderstood the idea of faith. And well, usually I say, we understand that faith is important, but it seems like we've misunderstood faith. I've asked a lot of people that question, what is faith? And I very rarely get, anything close to what kind of the dictionary definition of that word in the original language. So what is your working understanding of faith? How would you define that term?
Me personally?
That's
Or the
an
individual?
example,
Gotcha,
right?
Gotcha.
So that's kind of one that a lot of times that I do, because I do a lot of word studies, like with the discipleship class. So it's kind of like, what's your working definition of X? But that's just an example. I'm trying to get us to kind of brainstorm and say, like, what other ways could this play out? Let's broaden our toolkit a little bit here.
The majority of people, of course, would say, regarding faith is being able to believe in something to be true without concrete evidence.
Right.
Confirming.
Yeah, that's an example of the misunderstanding. But again, the point of me bringing that up.
11:2?
What's up?
Hebrews 11:2?
Hebrews 11:1 is
Things.
is the scripture that is usually taken as a definition,
Definition.
but I would take it not to be. But
What's that now? What was that last?
I don't take Hebrews 11:1 to be a definition of faith. I don't think that's what his purpose is in writing that. Now we're getting back into the whole thing. Focus on the lesson for today.
Open up a can of worms here, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I opened it up like 2 years ago.
I know.
I thought we already dealt with those
We did
words.
have one.
This is an
We did
example
already.
that did not store that in long-term memory. Dale, if I say my water bottle is black, did I just give you a definition of water bottle?
It's your perception of it, your description of it. What you saw
So,
it as.
yeah, it's something about my water bottle, but it has that same form. Blank is blank.
Mhm,
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
mhm.
My water bottle is a container built to hold liquid. That's maybe a little bit more of a
Go
definition,
ahead.
right? Same structure. Faith is entrusting yourself to someone in complete confidence, right? So if people have done their due diligence in studying the original language and coming up with that as a definition, that's not really what Hebrews 11:1 says. It doesn't say faith is entrusting yourself to someone in complete confidence, right? So if the definition is accurate, then that is not a definition.
Alright.
Or maybe saying something about faith. Like I was saying something about my water bottle. I could say my water bottle is black. I could also say, my water bottle is very important. However, I tend to leave it laying around more often than I would like to admit. here's something about faith. It's the substance of things hoped for. What's that? That means that it relates to the things we hope for in a very important way. So this kind of goes back to the difference between synthesis and analysis.
Synthesis knows you take it in one you're observing.
This is how faith connects to hope. Synthesis, I'm connecting two
Connecting
things.
the two.
Analysis is more like, let's chop up faith and see what it's built out of. Definition.
Right.
What is faith?
It's an observation.
In faith, what are the parts
Right.
versus how does faith connect to hope? We could look at other scriptures that talk about how faith connects to love, or how faith connects to salvation, how faith connects to works. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah.
So anyways, going back to the original topic at hand, that I was trying to give you just an example of, here's the problem. And I'm going to challenge you, you try to come up with a solution. If the problem is, a lot of times we misunderstand faith, then what is your solution? What do you think the true definition of faith is?
Everybody dictionary.
Everybody gets
A Greek lexicon.
Yes. Everybody tap into the Bible Gateway.
That is a project that I've tried to work on. It's like, how do I do that? What's a good resource to connect, students to with? That was kind of the whole idea for like the Step Bible, or
Not the one that we downloaded, because
Well,
the
yeah,
one that's online is really useful, and
Yeah.
they keep coming up with new stuff. They've got one that's you could get the version of a New King James with the books that are in the Bible.
Apocrypha.
Apocrypha. You can get the New King James with the
Yeah.
Apocrypha on that Step Bible.
Which is the Catholic Bible, isn't it?
The Catholics didn't write it, if that's what you imply.
There are some books that are in Catholic Bible that's not included in the Protestant Bible.
Right, but
Which is considered Apocrypha.
yes, but just because the Catholics recognize it doesn't
Does it?
mean
Right.
that it's Catholic in origin. That was
Yeah.
all I was trying to make sure we
Yeah,
understood.
there wasn't. Chapters that weren't they written like in between the Old and New Testament? What, some of them, the Apocrypha?
Some of them.
Been in between books.
No.
I'm not that familiar. I'm not sure. I know that some of them were thought to have been written in other times, but maybe that some of them were.
There were some that were early.
But anyways,
400, 500.
Yeah, they were, that's in between the
Right.
Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay, and what are you talking about after?
After Christ. But then I'm not a scholar, I've just looked at some of those books and I have them on it, so.
But anyway, the important thing here is that it's got that in there.
yeah, cool. So
Again, it's got the lexicon, you can find the original Greek and
yeah, that's
how many times it appears in the Bible, and where it's got a variant used in different verses, and
yeah.
you know, like angelos, whatever is
Mhm.
also literally means messenger, so
Right,
it
right.
could mean a human being.
Right, yep.
And on its usage, and find it that way.
Okay, so going back to brainstorming ways to apply the sixth claim in teaching practices. And you could write out a quiz, but it would have to be formatted in a way that was conducive to that. I mean, you couldn't just take, for example, the discipleship quizzes, hand them that and expect them to know what the fill in the blanks are, right? Because they're specifically, I mean, there's a lot of different people always tell me that you could put anything in that. And it's like, yeah, but That's not the point. The point is to remember what we talked about last time, you know? It is specifically a recall, not a general, you know, it's not, those wouldn't be good for a pretest. So you'd have to have it customized to where you ask a question that they could possibly answer without, you know, going through the spiel that we're about to go through to answer that question. All right.
Yeah, like another example of this, time would be like, my father is telling me while I would be building a new roof, they'll tear out the porch and build a new roof there, and it's like, never built a roof before, it's like, well, figure it out, and then if you have any questions, come and ask me, and so what I do, I sat down and I figured out how does a roof get built, you know, and then you use Pythagorean clean arm to figure out how the right stringers go in, right?
Mhm.
And I, of course, where I ended up figuring out how to do it all myself. I had to sit down and figure out what I needed to do and, you know, and then it's like, if I have a question, I'm come ask and say, okay, I didn't understand this part, how do I, you know, what's the next step with this?
Yep.
You know,
So what do you think? Do you think you learned more out of that experience than if your dad said, come on, son, I'm gonna show you how to do it. First you do this, then you gotta do that. Next, try to explain, this is why we do it this
I
way.
figured it out myself and sat down with pencil and paper and figured, you know, actually had to figure it out myself. I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
And then I sort of took it to my father and said, see, this is what I came up with. Is this even close? And he's like, yeah, go figure out how, what's your materials list and
Yeah,
go from there, but yeah, so basically I learned how to build a roof from figuring out how to build a roof.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, an intelligent person would have gone and asked a lot more questions, and said, can you show me this, and then how would I figure this one out, and, you know, that kind of thing, but I was being stubborn and arrogant, so I figured it all out on my own. But that'd be kind of what you're talking about here, is trying to solve a problem before being taught the solution. Like, you're trying to figure out what kind of a solution you can come up with, and then figure out the pros and cons of
I just get this
your
picture,
hypothetical solution.
is it this picture, James, of somebody taking you like a baby and throwing in the deep end of the.
Yeah,
water
it's just
and
serious.
swim,
Sink or swim.
sink or swim. Yeah. I mean, that's just,
well, and it also, I would say, you probably had other experiences to even get you in the ballpark of that,
I was
right?
just gonna say, you totally oblivious as to where the starting point was. So you had something to go on, you had resources you knew you could tap into, places you could look up, you knew some basics, so.
Well, back then there wasn't really like Google or.
And maybe he
Yeah.
knew that about you, did you have a lot of common sense, and he.
But even
put you into that.
if he didn't, you know, I think this point is still valid that if you
He
say,
developed that through that
hey, son,
circumstance.
you know, try to figure it out.
He developed it.
And he, let's say he was a lot less capable, still, according to this theory, sets him up for a more effective learning experience.
Mhm.
You know, because he's realizing, hey, I have these questions, you know, he's
It's kinda
challenging
like
himself.
what you were talking about earlier anyway, that. See what you've learned previously and see how does that apply to what I'm trying to accomplish now.
Mhm.
And that's what, you know, that had a lot to do with it. I had a general knowledge of how wood works and stuff like that.
And by the way, in that, the kind of the levels of, learning, what did we call that?
Bloom's taxonomy.
Taxonomy, yes. That would be an example of kind of the, at least according to some variations, the last level where you're trying to actually create something
Because you have all the other
with
layers built.
other information, yeah. Okay, I think we've thoroughly engaged with that principle. Let's move forward if you guys are up for that. So I go on, I say, this is related to the seventh claim I want to mention. quote, in virtually all areas of learning, you build better mastery when you use testing as a tool to identify and bring up your areas of weakness.
I gotta agree with that.
The
one.
benefit of testing is twofold. The first benefit is that it can be a form of retrieval practice. The second is that it can serve to correct illusions we may have about what we know, and these illusions can interfere with our ability to take our learning further.
Mhm. Absolutely. Cannot agree more. I love the word illusions in this. You think you got it, you know, it's an illusion, no, you don't. Moral, identify and how to implement these questions.
So I think this is pretty straightforward. We've all taken tests before. One of the things I was thinking is, you know, you have to have in order for testing to be effective, there needs to be a level of commitment, and I would even say like trust and a sense of identity. You know, I was just thinking, what determines the difference between, you know, failing a test and, you know, responding with more determination rather than discouragement? You know, at what point am I going to say, okay, I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and so I need to step my game up. That means I need to be more, you know, dedicated, or I just need to continue to focus on that subject more, or whatever that is, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, just, you know, forget it, forget the whole thing.
That's all possible.
You know, I think I've experienced that myself when I'm in the process of trying to learn to recognize God's voice, you know, where it's like sometimes I thought I heard him say this, and it turns out that that apparently wasn't, you know, accurate. You know, especially if it's like something that's predictive and then it, you know, doesn't happen. Okay, what do I do with that? Do I give up? Do I, you know, or even something in the middle? Do I allow myself to be even somewhat discouraged? I mean, I think that's been the more challenging thing, is not just give up altogether, but nevertheless, a little dent to my,
Your
you know,
ego.
not my ego, but I mean, maybe that too, but I was thinking more like, how do I say
Your
this?
dent in your
Giving
self-sufficiency.
up isn't always an all or nothing thing. You know, there are levels of, you know, giving up that can happen where we may not quit altogether, but we are maybe that much less, you know, determined, or that much less hopeful, I guess is the word. It can deteriorate that hope. I mean, I think that can play out with relationships, right? You know, if you've
Yeah.
if there's a relational conflict and you just say, forget it, you know, you might not give up on, let's just say, the marriage, you might not give up on it entirely, but yet a series of choosing to give up in this particular situation, you know, can accumulate over time and lead to, you know, that full, you know, quitting or whatever.
Oh,
Yep.
Sarah. Dude, you just opened up a can of worms, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm just throwing out examples that for us to relate to,
You're
but
speaking the truth.
I'm just saying, I guess I'll put this to a question. What can we do as in the ministry of teaching to help students respond well to, I'll just say failing a test, even if it's not like officially graded, but how can we help them to respond well to those and or even set them up to respond well to testing versus to be discouraged, even if it's just to varying degrees?
Was that a rhetorical question
Nope.
thrown out
I
there?
want some answers. Yes.
Examples. God calls us to continue forward, and the gift that would be in operation as a gift, or the fruit of the Spirit called perseverance, or what is it? For forbearance. We have a wonderful example in American history of forbearance. Thomas Edison is commonly given to be the one who discovered the light bulb. He failed 10,000 times consecutively, and then went one day and it lit up. Providing the opportunity for the person who's being educated to see that if he had stopped in midstream, he would not have been the one to discover the light bulb.
Okay.
That the probability is very high that someone else might have somewhere else.
Well, Tesla was already in the process.
Yeah, but he was the one. If he had stopped, he would not be given that place in American history. If we don't persevere or forbear, we don't know what fruit down the road in our life we're forfeiting.
Sure.
He would have forfeited if he had quit early,
Yep.
and that we don't need. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to learn from our history and our life with those things that we believe are not so nice or unfortunate, that there's lessons in that for us to learn to go forward. So if I can see somebody in class who just doesn't quite get it, but they've learned something from it, or find something of value through that, not quite getting it, they can gather momentum, encouragement by that. I'm not sure, because you kind of took me off there a little bit, I'm not sure if that is the answer to your question.
Yeah, that could be an answer. I mean, give them inspiring
There's
stories
always
from
something.
history of, perseverance and,
Perseverance.
This is a result, and the consequence would have been that Thomas Edison would have forfeited his place
Well,
in American history.
the thought about Thomas Edison is that he learned 10,000 ways of how not to conduct electricity, which was even more important before he learned how to conduct his electricity.
Yes.
He learned what not to do. So through those failures, it turned out to be a success, a good thing.
Mhm.
That if you can learn, if we can see, well, you're close. However, let's take a closer look at this. You can bring something out positive from that. That could be something good to come from not quite coming on that center of that target you're talking about, that dartboard.
yeah,
I've used that analogy 100 times. I love that analogy,
sure.
and that works, and people get it. That's a permanent fixture. I learned that here, and
We can find out what, read the room, what,
read the room. Each individual is different.
what kind of example the person respond to. Here's an example, if you're a sportsman,
Relate to.
something they can relate to. Michael Jordan in his career was called upon to make a game-winning or game-time shot 67 times. Out of those 67 attempts, guess how many he made? 35. Somewhere along the way, there had been consecutive attempts that he missed because of the percentage that he didn't make. If he had quit somewhere along the line,
He wouldn't be Michael
he
Jordan.
wouldn't be Michael Jordan, he would have his place in history. He would have
Persistence
he
to
would have
work through it.
then again forfeited the right to be called one of the greatest of all time. Because he quit, because he would have quit.
Acknowledging that Christ will enable us to learn these things clearly. If you have a desire and your desire isn't quite there, you can pray for that desire.
Yes,
You will obtain that desire and you will get it down. You don't have it yet,
which you will.
but we will. Let's pray about that now.
Yeah.
Lord, let's open. I have somebody here who's got an open heart who wants to learn these things better. So as we go over these things again, let it be a permanent fixture. And we'll go over this again, Lord, so help us. What we can't do in and of our own power, Christ can enable us to do.
Yep.
Because he's the one that gave us that faint glimpse of what we desire to be, what we want to be. We want to be out of this crisis. We want to be out of that. We see a faint glimpse of what that looks like, and Christ can only enable that. We can't do it in and of our own power. And you're going to fail the first 4 or 5 times in X, Y, or Z. But stick to it. Christ will enable you to learn that. And that's what I told my grandson.
Cool. All right. You guys ready for the 8th claim? Wrap this up, land the plane. The 8th claim states, the more you can explain about the way your new learning relates to your prior knowledge, the stronger your grasp of the new learning will be, and the more connections you create that will help you remember it later. This practice is known as elaboration. I guess this is why it is important to let students make comments in class, even if it can eat up time.
Yeah.
So giving them an opportunity to make those connections. How else can we use elaboration in a classroom setting?
If a person has a knowledge or understanding gap, and you happen to know, like, here's for instance, there were things that were written in the Church of Corinth that may not make particular sense to us today, but if you go through the historical significance and tell what was going on in the church, explain that, then elaboration is useful too.
If you find, let's say, a new Christian or even an experienced Christian, you can pick up patterns as to how God is intervening in their life. You can see things where they may not be aware of it right now, and you can make that leap. Okay, X, Y, or Z has happened to you, Miss Susie, bringing you to this right here, giving you hope for this or this or this. Right?
Brother Chair,
Yes, sir.
the gift of elaboration would be used in this form, like with a new disciple. They make expression, I don't really know what's going on inside of me, but I feel my certain desires are beginning to change. And I don't want to do some things, and I definitely want to do other things. And you explain to them, this is the working of the Holy Spirit. He's changing your heart desires. You're being conformed or shaped in to look like Jesus. This is why. That would be an expression of elaboration.
I think it could be elaboration, but it's kind of the way you presented it seems to me like a different context. I mean, if we're thinking of, a teaching setting is like, here's the point. How can I connect this, help them to connect it to their life experiences? The point is what you've started with, and the connections is what you're trying to get to, as opposed to in your scenario, They say, they bring your experiences and you try to connect that to a point. I think it's a good thing to do. Could effectively have the same benefit. But I just want to point out that it's a little bit different in terms of what we're talking about in as far as we're usually starting with the content that we're trying to teach, and then find a way to get them to relate that to those experiences.
Yeah, their prior knowledge, what they already did or were previously. How does this new material connect to that and interweaving? And how can you make it more relatable?
Right.
Okay, I can see how, like, what he was talking about with the lessons in discipleship, how we take this lesson to help build up how we learn
Today.
this lesson.
Yeah.
They all just build one on the other. So more ties that you can make from the new material to the existing material,
Mhm.
more ties you can make, the easier it is, the stronger a
And even
bond
better,
it'll be.
Yeah.
and if you can apply their personal experience, it hits home even more.
Well, and it's essentially the same principle, but I like how you're relating it to,
Yeah. I like it.
you know,
That's what it says.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, like, we're kind of talking about that in a ministry context of, you know, personal experiences. In other words, other things that God has taught them in other contexts. But that whole conversation that we had earlier about the apprenticeship over the last 3 years is,
Yeah, that's why I talked into that,
yes.
because that was something that we were discussing.
Yeah.
You did understand.
Yep.
So I was
Use that in there.
Yeah.
So I was elaborating.
You're elaborating on elaboration. I like what you did with it. Yes, sir.
I just got a picture, it's just a visual picture of a rope ladder being built. So, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh? That's all right, it's your shot, that's all right.
No, I think that works. You want to explain how the rope ladder relates to elaboration?
Well, you're building upon that foundational experience, you're adding. And then there's another section, then there's another and another.
Mm-hmm.
Build a rope ladder, you might want to start from top down.
No.
It's got to be connected to something at the top.
Trying to build a rope ladder from.
Better to start from the top down. Okay. Don't ever let anybody tell you your brain's not on it, brother. Don't ever let anybody. tell you.
He's right, you know. Yeah, at least with the runners, at least with the runners. But the rungs, you could do the rungs at the bottom as long as you got the runners attached.
Yeah, but the foundation truly is,
So, yeah.
in a rope ladder, it would be the top, but everything, as far as elaborate section.
Or if you come to the top end,
I'm building it over like this, I'm like,
oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute, as you come from the top down, you've got something solid you can step down to, because you've got something solid in order to support you before you go down to the bottom.
If you're climbing down from it, yeah.
If you add another rung and then you take that step and you can add the next rung.
But you got something solid already that you can stand on.
Yeah,
before
that's
you
how
go
we built
it down.
So we built stairs.
Start from the top down.
So since we're talking about rope ladders, have you guys heard my rope ladder story?
No.
It was a chain and rope ladder, but
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, it was. So we had these long dog chains because we lived out in kind of a rural area. So they were chains that were probably, 40 feet, I don't know, 20 feet at least. And so I made a rope ladder. Well, the rungs were made out of rope, so I guess it was rope and chain to get out from my second story window, right? So I do hook it from the top, as James pointed out. I think it was actually inside the room. I think I connected him to the bedpost or something, and out the window. So I'm testing it out. I climb out the window, and leave the window open because I'm going to climb back up. So I climb
Hopefully.
down, climb back up. Well. My brother walks in the room after I climbed out the window and he's like, it's in the middle of the winter. So he's like, what the heck is the window doing open? He comes and shuts the window. So I get to the top, back up to the top, and I'm like, oh man, he shut the window. So I knock on the window right after I knock on the window, that rung that I'm standing on breaks. So my brother is in the room. First of all, why was the window open? Second of all, he hears a knock at the window, turns and there's nobody there. Second story window, right? So he comes over, opens the window to find me running around the yard like, because I slid down that
Oh, I bet.
chain ladder all the way down, cold chain, you know. So anyways, that was pretty funny. Not at the time.
And
but
none of,
after.
and your mom and dad, they thought it was funny too, didn't they?
We probably didn't tell him about that for a while. I don't know. Maybe I tried to keep it hidden and he told him. I don't remember, but anyways.
Your brother I met at your graduation.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Stacy Keach was the father, like growing up in the 70s, and he was one stand-up comedian. Like they have been, but
Yeah.
it was a sitcom, but it was all about, you know, like growing up in the 70s, his dad would just stand around and be like, go ahead, try that. Stick a paper clip in the outlet or whatever, but you won't do that again. And think this is how you learned in the 70s. This is how I get taught.
Yeah.
You just keep him out of swim, you just threw him off the dock.
Swim, sink or swim.
Sink or swim, yeah.
So anything else on elaboration? Well, let's keep going, you guys. We still got a good half hour. And
Leave it 20 after.
okay, we still got a good 20 minutes. And this next book overlaps with the last one. So this next one's called Powerful Teaching, Unleash the Science of Learning. What was the last one called? Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning. So again, it's another science-based learning methods. So this book focuses on 4 quote unquote power tools. These methods are said to be backed by scientific research, some of which the authors personally participated in. One of them was a scientist and the other one was a teacher, I think. Retrieval practice is simply the practice of recalling information, which can take various forms. The basic idea is that it is much more beneficial to have students, I think that needs an S, students practice remembering information than merely reviewing it. So we've already talked about that one. Spacing or spaced practice is the strategy of spreading out the timing of engagement with material, allowing some forgetting to occur, which increases the difficulty of recalling the information, but also strengthens long-term storage. Yeah, I mean, so we talked about this practice too, but I think the thing that's a little bit different, at least how it's stated in my summary, is they talk about the benefit of forgetting. That you actually want to allow some measure of forgetting in order to make the remembering more challenging.
Time engagement material, some forgetting to occur, which increases the difficulty. Which would make it. Which also from.
So I thought that was an interesting point. You know,
Okay, because it makes you work harder at trying to retrieve that.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, that makes.
Yeah, it's a long sentence.
Harder. That's what you forgot stuff.
I made you work hard on that sentence, didn't I? Maybe that was Paul's strategy. Make really long, complicated sentences, because the more challenging the sentence, the more better they'll remember it.
Yeah, if you ever figured what he's saying there, then you won't forget it.
I've said it many times in this class. It was a study on the Holy Spirit by St. Augustine. Some of those sentences were 150 words long, 17 commas, 35 parentheses, and you're supposed to understand it from start to beginning.
Well, if that's true, he's even got Paul beat, but
Oh, look, I
I
mean,
think-
like, some of these paragraphs are this long.
Prob-
Fine print.
but 35 parentheses?
Oh, well, you know what, it's a little exaggerated, but
Okay,
you'll have
just making
parentheses in there and commas
Yeah.
and you've got one major concept he's trying to elaborate on.
Yep.
And not here,
Yeah.
I still haven't read it, I've been trying for like 15
Like you
years.
guys sometimes in the
I've
Bible.
only got like a half.
I have to figure it out, reread it, like, wait a minute, that is all one sentence, okay, then read it, totally different.
Yep.
Now, it doesn't make a very big
The
difference,
Trinity is the name of the book.
realize that's all one thing. It's all
Yeah.
one concept.
Define meta.
Oh, how did I know that?
And a lot of times, like in NIV, they've broken it up into several sentences, but if you look at it in the original language, it's, yeah.
Yeah,
And some of the more literal
Yeah.
translations, yeah, they can be pretty long sentences.
have you not done that?
Well, you betcha, that's all right, I can come over
Absence
for
of
you.
commas here means that.
Okay, you'll be here? Okay, I'll see you here then. All right, brother.
Okay, so same practice, a little bit of a different angle. Moving on to interleaving, which we've also already discussed, is the strategy of mixing different types of practice or content together in a way that challenges students to figure out the correct way each problem or question needs to be engaged. Again, this increases difficulty and therefore also increases learning. So mixing different types of practice, another typo, or content together in a way that challenges students to figure out the correct way each problem or question needs to be engaged.
Would interleaving be an example of, let's say you have something to read and something to watch in a video? You'd be interweaving something visual and something reading at the same time?
Nope, nope. The classic example that I gave last time is, let's say you're doing math and you have a mix of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all mixed together. So let's say, third grader, they're having to just, okay, now what do I do for long division again? Okay, no, wait, different rules for subtraction. Instead of just doing a whole page of division where they're just getting this routine, okay, same rules for each problem, I just plug in the same rules. No, I've got to remember the different rules for the different type of problem that I'm working on. And that's challenging me to bounce back and forth. Right? So here's another example. Let's say you're a construction worker. And instead of just doing all the framing, you build a wall and then you wire it and then you plumb it and then you drywall it, insulate it and then you drywall it. That would be a fairly ridiculous way to do it, but you would learn your trades better if you were jumping back from this trade to that trade to this trade, right?
You also learn how to do it in the correct order once you got all done with that wall, and say, what do I do with this thing?
Yep,
Turn the drywall back on, put it in plumbing. And
yep,
Is there anything else I'm forgetting? You redo it and say, okay, now how do I dry my hair? Put in the electric.
exactly. That example probably wasn't as helpful, but
No, that's all.
it just came to mind,
How I learned.
Um,
Of course, it's one of the good ways I learned, like, getting hired on a new job and the boss will be like, you know how to run this thing? And I'm like, yeah, I've run one of those, and then I'll learn on the job, like floor wax and stripper and
yeah.
bobcats.
Here, I got an example.
Yeah, let's hear it, Dale.
Remember back in the Bible reading class, you gave us that picture on
The bridge.
the bridge.
Okay.
Perfect. Wouldn't that be interweaving in teaching us different you've got another stuff here for me to apply to this. I've got the Bible and obviously it's self-sufficient in with itself. But I'm able to use this tool in order for me to bring, to understand the analogy that there's things in the Old Testament we can bring forward. So I'm using that model, that picture, in order for me to learn how to apply what I've learned in the Bible. Would that be fair?
Mm-mm.
Some of that tool will be used for that.
That's not a example of interleaving. If I understand what you're saying.
I'm learning for one,
You're using the same tool to do different things. But in interleaving, the whole point is to use different tools so that you learn.
okay, so I was gonna take it to the next level with my analogy.
Okay,
Let's say instead of you bringing together a piece of paper, you bring together a video. Here we're doing auditorial, visual, here we're reading.
I don't think so. I think that's just different channels, but interleaving is like different practices, different subjects.
Okay.
So it would be maybe it's basically what you're doing right now, right? With your studies, we got like 4 different things going on. We got teaching class. We got comparative religions. You're going through your book on the pastoral epistles, working on a research project, right? Well, we could just, so let's say you spend 10 hours a week on all those things. Instead of putting all those 10 hours into just teaching class, or putting all those 10 hours into just comparative religions, you're spreading out your hours to 4 different subjects.
Like you've been doing teaching class Monday, comparative religion Tuesday, your thing, other thing you do, like on Monday, you're gonna do 1 hour teaching, 1 hour comparative, 1 hour, the epistles.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be even more
1 hour on each thing, you know,
Okay.
so you're just.
mixing together different types of
Yeah.
practice.
That way you're getting a little bit of this one, and then you're gonna get a little review on this one, and you get a little review. All fresh in your mind.
And so I think this one
I think
is,
it's becoming clear.
well,
I
what's,
keep trying to overlap and that we're talking apples and oranges here.
yeah, so, but I think what's coming clear to me in this conversation is the challenge of using interleaving. I mean, there's a reason why we're not doing, the example that you just gave. I mean, we could do we have 2.5 hours on Mondays? We could be doing a half hour of 5 different classes. But instead we do 2.5 hours of one subject.
So I guess it just dawned on me, I might be filtering through my own deficiencies or inadequacies instead of trying to learn this correctly. Because when I have a hard time, is I'll combine this, but then if I combine something that I read and see along with this, then it comes together better. And I think that's where I'm getting the confusion here.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Only because I'm looking through my lens of me, so
sure.
what I'm trying to be taught.
Yeah, I think that's a valid benefit, but I think it's different than what we're talking about here.
Slightly different.
But again, what I'm suggesting is that it may be in theory more effective, but in practice, I guess my question is it how practically applicable is it? In other words, just because something is theoretically more effective doesn't mean it's I mean, for a tool to be useful, it has to not only be effective, but it has to be usable, right?
Hmm.
So to take interleaving to that extent, you know, I mean, sometimes it takes us 10 minutes just to get started on the class. And if we were switching subjects every half hour, you know,
Right.
that would be impractical. I guess that's the word I'm
Yeah,
trying
well,
to
I
think of.
think more along the lines of study.
And I think-
even for yourself would be like, I mean, like what we're doing this class today and then the other class on Tuesdays. When we were meeting 4 days a week for 5 hours, we would do
Yeah.
like 2 hours on this class, and then we do 2 hours on this class. And then on Wednesday, we would sometimes review what we did yesterday, and then we would do something else. You know, like we'd have 8 sessional lessons, then we'd have, Bible theory, and then
Yeah.
on Wednesday, we'd do, prayer. and
Yeah.
then-
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, and I think I think that's what they are having in mind too. It's not, because I mean, I think these guys were, I don't think they were elementary, I think they were the one was a middle school teacher. I mean, yeah, they're not doing a half-hour class either. Their class, you know, is what it is, but, as they're having the students, you know, formulate either their homework time or maybe, I'm trying to remember, I think middle class, you're still kind of doing some of your homework in class. So maybe that's how they're doing their practice times. Again, I guess here's a way to kind of put what you said into different words to use our math analogy. We're not spending 5 minutes on teaching you how to do division and then 5 minutes on teaching you how to do multiplication. But when you're doing your practice problems, we're
You're right.
mixing up your practices. Yeah. So this is not a practice for presenting information. It's a practice for engaging the information. Does that make sense?
The interleaving, yeah, would be. Like interleaving.
Yep.
Be like spending time on this one, and we'll spend time on the next one. And then. Spending time on reviewing A, and then spend time with B, then spend time with C, then spend time reviewing B.
Yeah. Yep. So that being said, this really would be a practice that you would use in in a program like Telos, as opposed to just like a class at church or something. You have to have, if you're going to use this in teaching a particular person, there has to be multiple subjects that you're, you know, leading them through in order to, you know, encourage them to use this practice in their studies. Whereas again, if you're just doing a class, you know, a single class, you know, maybe at church or whatever, depending on what all's in that class, maybe there's some interleaving, but maybe not. And this kind of, I'm relating this to where we're at with some of the newer apprentices who are doing their coursework through video. Because actually, most of them have been doing just a class at a time, as opposed to multiple classes. So maybe that's something that there might be value, especially if they have more hours that they're, you know, able to commit to a week. It might be better to encourage them to dig into at least, you know, 2 or 3 classes at a time. I don't know, something to pray about. If this scientific theory even matches up with the Bible, do we got any Bible verses to base this on?
Oh, no.
No. Sounds like it's
Some pagan science.
I don't know. Holy Spirit, does this in the Bible?
Scriptural. references to back this up, was the question.
Mhm.
With these that we just talked about.
You know what? Let's just Google it. What are we doing?
Let the Google do the walking.
I doubt we'll come up with anything.
Google application. There we go.
Is there a scripture that would be in line with the? In the Bible with interleaving or the mixing of subjects, as far as remembrance? 43:26 and I related.
Say it again.
Isaiah 43:26.
Well, might be retrieval practice, but it's not interleaving.
Uh, Right. There.
What?
Go ahead, you know you want to, Dale.
Okay,
Give me the description.
Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, since we are I know this is pertaining to something else, but we could be looking at it like therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witness, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that is so easily entangles. So this would invite us to bring in those other those people to guide us, to direct us away from what we run the perseverance, the race marked for us, out for us. Would it be fair to say that right here in this class, right here, we are not only a cloud of witnesses to the living Jesus Christ, but we are that interleaving resources, interleaving to one another. No.
Nope. You're back to the other idea of what interleaving. Yeah. It's not so much, it's not so much about multiple sources. It's about diversity of concepts.
I'm still confused.
All right, how about this one? Then he said to them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Maybe there's an even better verse for this, but what I was thinking is, we might have even talked about this. I think I had this conversation with someone recently. If we go all in for Jesus, right? We're giving up every sin issue, every character defect. He doesn't say just work on one thing at a time. He says you know, all or nothing, right? If you're gonna follow me, you gotta take up your cross. So that means with all of the different temptations or character defects that we might have that is included in this, we're not just gonna chip away at them one at a time. We're gonna trust him with all of them from the beginning. And so I might be tempted with one thing in one moment and another thing with another moment. You know, Jesus in the wilderness, you know, he faced multiple temptations back to back. Is this a stretch?
Oh, no, it's not. I don't think so.
Because you're working on different issues all at the same time instead of just like, you know, first I'm going to work on my
Lust of the eyes, and lust of the flesh, and lust of.
Pride of life.
Pride of life.
you know, if you're working on several different, you know, sin issues all at once in, let's say, a season of life. I bring this up because I've heard people, and I've even thought about this, you know, does it make sense to just work on one thing at a time? I've heard people say, you know what, I'm just trying to work on my sobriety right now. I'll deal with this less thing later. Or, you know, interleaving is like, no, I'm going to trust Jesus to like sanctify me in all of these areas in one season of life. Go ahead.
Surrender all those character defects and then the interweaving begins because you're already thrown off that weight. Sin that's so easily beset you, and then he can just start
Hey, that was the verse Dale brought up.
Yeah.
Dale, your verse does work. Because he says, throw off everything that hinders us, not just one thing at a time.
Surrender.
You nailed it, bro. I mean,
Surrender the identifiable character defects.
you guys see it? Everything that hinders us, right? Aha.
Ah.
There is hope.
There is hope.
James, you're not seeing it?
No, not compared to what it, how it is.
Well, no.
Leaving.
How do you get this stuff, Dale? I'll take some wooden hammer and clutch your head and went, and then it just kicks in just at the perfect right time, and you were right. Yeah.
If we're throwing off everything all at once, we're working on learning in multiple subjects, right?
And the objective of all this curriculum is so that to give that sin that hinders us, we navigate that and rid ourselves. And how do we do that? All these many things.
So let's say, for example, the works of the flesh, right? So Galatians 5:19. This is maybe a list of all the things that we're throwing off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe,
And because you've thrown them off, we now realize and experience 22:3.
yeah. So one moment I'm tempted with sexual immorality. The next minute I'm, you know, I got to deal with rage. I'm bouncing back and forth, you know, learning to be pure and then learning to be humble and then learning to be at peace. This is all mixed together in a day's worth of various temptations.
You're talking about doing it all, throwing it all off at once simultaneously. No, that's not what you're leaving.
Well, I'm just saying,
Dealing with each one at a time.
Well-
In Jesus, this is possible.
I guess what I'm saying when I say all at once, I mean I'm talking about in a particular season of life, right? So let's say in this moment, I'm going to trust God to deal with all these things. So therefore, throughout the day, I'm going to have to be working on all of them instead of just saying, I'm going to forget about all of my anger issues. I'm not going to worry about my lust issues. I'm just going to focus on, you know, not hating people.
Or how
I'm just
about-
gonna work on not hating people, and then later on, I'll try to work on some of these other
I've
things.
shared this.
That's kind of what I was talking about, throwing it all off at once, just presuming that then we are gonna be having to deal with multiple things back to back. That's how I was trying to connect
You've
that.
heard it out of my lips many times. There was a time in my life, 27 years ago, I could have turned left, but I turned right. I'm still doing that. Every day, I could go back and go back to what I was. And go back to my kids, my grandkids. I still could, but I'm still on a daily basis. Setting that stuff off. I'm still intentionally
Sure.
turning right. Would that be? I could go back to X, Y, or Z, which would have been immoral. I would have had to be angry. It would have had to be a self-ambition to make me all that. But because I had to deny myself, my family, all that was old to follow what new Christ had for me,
Yeah,
I'm still doing that to this day.
well, when you lump all those things together as one decision, I think that's kind of what James's point
Again,
was.
I'm blowing.
That, no, you're not, I'm just trying to work with your example to clarify the point. If we think of it as one action of, dealing with all those issues, then yeah, that kind of
Oh, no.
muddies the waters, but if I think what you're saying
Oh, I
is,
threw 150 different things there, not
Yeah,
just one
so-
lump.
as you're doing that, the whole point of this analogy is, as you're doing that on a daily basis, you're challenged with multiple different issues, multiple different
Oh, yeah.
temptations, multiple different areas of learning. And when you're doing different areas of learning, in a row, that's the idea of interleaving. We all good with that? 1 minute over our deadline? Satisfied?
Need to wait,
What's up?
need to wait, remember the end of the 20 minutes.
Oh, I think you got more time.
He's coming to me now.
Oh, that's right,
No,
I'm apologizing.
that's all right, Bert.
Cause he'll be 20 minutes late. I mean, you got an hour.
Probably.
Well,
No, I'm sensing different.
I should probably work on some other stuff, so let's wrap it up. Who wants to pray us out here today?
Father, in the name of Jesus, I just thank you for the opportunity to gather together in your name and learn. And Lord, we just know that in a lot of ways, we are drawing out of Jared what you intended for us to have, Lord, but we just know that that cup is being filled daily. We ask there never come an occasion where he would feel dry or detached in the work that he's doing, but as he stays relationally connected, many things will happen, including being strengthened by God in his inner man, that Ephesians 3:14-19 will be made manifest fully in his lifetime. And it's a prophetic gesture right now. Or I just stand physically alongside my brother as you continue the work, as his ears are open and ears are pointed up in relationship to you, that you would fill them with tailor-made strategies for this classroom and even tailor-made strategies for individuals in the family. Give them wisdom, knowledge, understanding, wisdom to continue to receive the will of peace. Lord, we thank you and praise you for all the good that you do in our lives. Thank you for Jesus' name.
Amen. All right, thanks, everybody. Bless you guys.